we are doing the impact of colonization on the Muslim mind and the responses. We can categorize the responses into three broad categories. Number one, capitulation. Absorb. Just take it all in. Whatever the West says, that has got to be Islam. Number two, defense mechanism, rejection. Anything coming from the other side of the pond, anything coming from that side, any ideas that we haven't thought of, they must inherently be problematic and dangerous. We have an established theology, an established law, an established mechanism, an established madrasa. We don't need to change an iota of what we teach. And I call these strands collectively, in a technical, in an academic manner, the fundamentalist strands. Obviously, the term fundamentalist obviously is politically loaded, and I don't mean any of the political baggage. And so if you want to change this to, let's say, dogmatic or textually rigid, right? Or extremely faithful to the past. If you want to change it to those terms, that is fine as well, because I do understand the term fundamentalist has baggage that the modern political language has that I'm not intending. I'm intending the technical definition, which once upon a time was devoid of that baggage. What is perhaps more appropriate now is to say textually rigid. They go back to their texts, their theologies, their legal tradition of the past. And the presumption is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And they believe their tradition is not broke. It has done the job for 300 years, 400 years, 500 years. Why change? If the world has changed, tough luck on them. We have to remain faithful. The people have to change for us. We do not change for others. And that is multiple strands. And there are many characteristics that combine all of them, and I mentioned some of them last time. What are some of the benefits, by the way, of this dogmatism, of this textually rigid? There are benefits. The number one benefit is that those who opt in do actually preserve theology and rituals and law to a great extent. If you're able to opt in, well, guess what? Yes, you haven't changed, and so you are preserving a tradition. Number two is that each one of these traditions, and there are multiple traditions that have the same characteristics of looking backwards and being textually rigid and considering iconic figures of the past to be the people that need to be taught now. Those theologies, those law books, those methodologies are what I should be teaching you if I were in that strand, right? So, and of course, depending on which strand, who I teach will differ, but the concept of going back and then taking them as a primary reference and not daring to question their scholarship, that is universal, and that has a positive. What is the positive? Each one of these strands, pretty much without exception, especially the ones you're familiar with in America, has an established legacy. It has one or multiple iconic seminaries. It has tens of thousands of graduates that are reinforcing the ideology of that strand. And so there is a comfort in familiarity, in numbers. Wherever you go in the world, the more successful that strand, you will find pockets of that strand. And you will find yourself amongst people who are speaking the same way as you about Islam. Your same concerns, your same issues, you kind of feel a sense of familiarity. And of course, because you have an established seminary or seminaries, established schools, established curriculums, there is comfort in the quality and the quantity of scholarship. Right? You find comfort that you are not lost and stranded, you're not alone, because there are tens of thousands or millions of people that are in a similar ideology. So there are lots of positives to those strands. But as I pointed out in our last lecture, and I've said this multiple times throughout, because I used to be of that, so obviously I am quite familiar. Why did I move on? Well, because I began to see what I consider to be the potential negatives. Whether those negatives outweigh the positives is up to you to decide. But from the way I see this, in preserving the school, in preserving the dogmatic textual literalism, you lose relevancy to the people that live around you. you lose relevancy. Large segments of mankind, of Muslims, don't find solutions to the problems they are facing. Because in resurrecting the past, you are bypassing the modern problems that they're facing. And actually, you might even introduce them to problems that are of no concern to them. Debates and issues that are of zero relevance to them, but they might have been very relevant 500 years ago. But because your strand was created at a certain point in history, and that controversy was really big back then, well then, we have to preserve the tradition. And the only way to preserve the tradition is to resurrect that exact same controversy, teach you that controversy, bash those evil people that existed 500 years ago, and then preserve the tradition. But in the process, the questions, the issues that are plaguing you are nowhere to be found, because that's not what that particular tradition was meant to do. And so, while it is great in protecting some aspects of the religion, the vibrancy, the application of the religion of Islam is not demonstrated by and large, which is why, in the eyes of many people, these types of strands become, if not actual cults, very cult-like. If not actual segments that are disconnected, they have some or many of the characteristics that we would consider to be, just breaking away and fragmenting. And another issue is that some or many of the theological beliefs and the legal opinions that this strand has are going to be perceived as archaic or irrelevant at best, and perhaps even detrimental at worst. In other words, because that strand wants to preserve a thought that was constructed in a different time, a different place, a different ambience, a different world, some of those ideas might be archaic and outdated, and some of them might actually be harmful to the iman of the people that are grappling with new sets of problems. And so, classic example is that almost all books that are written about Islamic theology, pre-modernity, concentrate on the issue of the divine attributes like 30, 40, 50%. And the fact of the matter is that this is a done deal. Nobody in the modern world really cares about it anymore. And the average Muslim mind is not really problematizing this subject whatsoever. But if you were to study in any seminary, any version of Sunnism or Shi'ism or Zaydism or Ibadism, when you go back to these classical textbooks, 30, 40, 50% is a detailed defense of that school's articulation of how we understand the divine attributes. And who's the enemy? All the other Muslims who had a different understanding. It's not really relevant to any of you or any of us. But when you go study there, it will become the primary focus. When it comes to Islamic law, this is where it gets very sensitive. Very sensitive. But again, you're living in the modern world. Legal opinions formulated in the past are not necessarily inherently binding unconditionally. That is my stance. That is a stance that the second paradigm would not be happy with. Legal opinions formulated by scholars who lived in a different time and place, formulated. I'm not talking about the Qur'an. I'm not talking about unanimous consensus. I'm not talking about that which is known to be of the religion. I'm talking about derived opinions. I'm talking about extrapolated fiqh. Legal opinions that have been extrapolated from the Qur'an and Sunnah are worthy of respect if they're done by right scholars, but are they binding for all of eternity? I would argue, no. And we see this in the constant back and forth between the various fatwa that various, madhabs and scholars give. The most obvious one for you guys is the issue of the moon sighting, whether it should be by the eye or by calculation. This is one simple example, right? I don't want to go into the fiqh of it, but the point is that this is how it's always been done. We have always witnessed the moon with our eyes, and we will continue to do so. And again, you listen to my lectures, I've given longer lectures about this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not make the viewing of the moon an act of worship. Allah literally calls the crescent to be a sign. So if you know that sign exists, then you take it into account. And I've gone into more detail in this regard. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Qur'an that, pray at the crack of dawn and pray when the sun is going down. Nobody goes outside and sees whether the sun is rising or setting to pray Fajr or Maghrib. You're following charts. Every one of you is following charts. Nobody visually looks at the sun and moon, because we know when the sun rises and when the sun sets. The same can be said of the moon. We know exactly when the moon is born, exactly when, down to a millisecond. That's why we can predict eclipses to a millisecond. We can predict them literally to a millisecond. We know exactly when the moon will be born. And if we know that, we might as well take that into account, and it will make life easier. You can take off. We will maximize Eid attendance, which is the main goal of the Sharia. Facilitate our children having school holidays, such as in New York and New Jersey, and hopefully one day Texas as well. That can only happen if we announce it beforehand. My point is, dynamic fiqh versus fiqh that is found a little bit old. And one of the biggest controversies, so many gender issues, gender roles, so much. Classical fiqh has views that are, it's difficult for me to even say them because, some of you haven't heard these views, so I don't want to frighten you away. But classical fiqh has different, it was a different world. The world was different, not just the Muslim world. In the West, women didn't have the right to own property, to vote. You know this, the 19th Amendment is 100 years ago. The world was radically different. So in that world, for our fuqaha to extrapolate a system of laws, the goal of which was to protect women in a very different world, that's great. But what parts of it are still binding today? And what parts can we fine-tune? And I've said this bluntly, that even some of those that are teaching those versions of fiqh, in seminaries, could not apply it in their own households today. They don't apply those rulings in their own households today, because it's not possible to do so. Right? I know this because I've lived through, that type of mentality. So my point is that when you have both theology and rituals and law that were written and codified and extrapolated in a different time and place, and you consider that to be the religion of Islam, then when you supplant it, when you pick it out from 13th century Baghdad and you force it down, 2026 Dallas, Texas, there's going to be, what is this? Why do I need to study this to be a good Muslim? And even more, like, Allah is asking this of me? Or is it a man's interpretation of what Allah wants me to do? When you do not differentiate between what Allah says versus what a person has derived from what Allah says, which is what I would consider, the dogmatism to do, then this is a serious problem. I would argue, and this is very contentious, much of the criticism that some of those who doubt Islam or leave Islam have is not of Islam. It is of the human interpretation of Islam. And that if we could, not all, because sometimes they literally reject the Qur'an directly, which is not, okay, well that's, if you cannot accept the Qur'an, I can't really help you. But if you have a problem with an interpretation of the past, if you have a problem with how people extrapolated law, and you're not willing to, like I would say, okay, that is an interpretation of the 3rd century, the 4th century. We don't necessarily have to follow that issue, depending on what it is. If we're not even allowed to say that, you will end up harming the religion more than benefiting it. And again, if you listen to some of my, I don't want to be too explicit, guys, because it really gets problematic. Wallahi, it gets problematic. I don't want you to, astaghfirullah, disrespect those strands, because in the end of the day, they are pious people. They are good people. I love them. I used to belong to them, right? As I said, they are good people. But some of the views that are found in those classical books are simply, difficult for us to come to terms with. And I have given multiple lectures about these. If you listen to my detailed lectures about gender issues, I'll give you some, you can listen to them. I'm not going to be too explicit, but I have to mention some things here. So one of them is, can we change the age of marriage? This is a very contentious issue amongst traditionalists. Even last few months, there was a Muslim land that wanted to raise the bar for the age of marriage. And many of the clergy, many of them were up in arms. How dare you say that she has to be 16 or 17. It's something, then they quote scholars from the past, and I don't want to say those quotes, but it's an opinion, and different world. Guys, the world got married earlier, 500 years ago. I don't find that problematic, but 2026, do we not have the right to say the world has changed and there should be a minimal age that a man and a woman, a young lady, a young boy, a young girl should be able to get married? I argue, I have a whole lecture online, the Sharia allows that, and I have all the evidences, and it should be made a minimum. We should not have, a 10-year-old getting married. We should not have that. I'm not criticizing the past at all, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, but it was a different time, a different place. Does the Sharia not allow? Look at the rulings of, Milk Yamin is another really big issue, right? Do we not have the legality to say, okay, that was a different time and place, now we have the right to, the world has changed. The institution of that entire concept no longer exists. So we have the right to rethink through, okay? Very sensitive, I'm sorry, brothers and sisters, but it is what it is. Let me put this gently. Coercing your spouse for intimacy when your spouse does not want intimacy. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm sorry, go read some of the books of fiqh. Go read some of them. Explicit statements. And I don't think that this is how a marriage is going to flourish in our times. It's just not going to work. Do we have internal mechanisms within the Sharia? And I say we do. And go listen to my lecture. وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ لا ضرر ولا ضرار. There are maxims in the Qur'an and Sunnah that we can tap into that are, listen to me carefully, culturally relevant. If Islam is meant to be applied in every time and place, which all those scholars say, even the traditionalists say this, if Islam is meant to be universal, which everybody says, well then, that has to be demonstrated in the slight, not the radical revisionism, but there has to be an organic give and take. And this is where the third paradigm comes up. So I would argue that ultra dogmatic strands have lots of positives, and they definitely have strong piety, and they have a fierce loyalty for Islam. May Allah bless them with that. But I would also argue they have an intransigence to recognize that Allah has given mechanisms within the religion. This is not external. Allah has made the religion such that you can fine-tune based upon cultural circumstances in some areas, not in all. That's all that the third paradigm says. Now, nobody would actually disagree with the theory, even the traditionalists. They wouldn't disagree. But in practice, ask them, what have you changed? Ask them, the books you're quoting me from 300 years ago in Arabia, in India, in 500 years ago in Baghdad, what have you actually changed for America 2026? That's where you're going to see. Theory, everybody agrees. Yes, as the maxim goes, that fatwas change from time to place. This is a standard maxim. Every student of knowledge memorizes it. Fatwas change from time to place. You memorize the theory, go ahead and apply it, but they don't. And this is where my gentle criticism comes, that you are teaching a theory that you yourselves are not applying. Why? Oh, who are you to challenge my hujjah, my Shaykhul Islam, who are you? And it's not a matter of challenging. We're not in competition. We're building. We're standing on the shoulders of giants. Don't look at it as competitions. I say that's what my Shaykhul Islam would have done if he were in America. That's my understanding, right? I say you're actually not following the spirit of that hujjah, that shaykh. You're following what he said. You're not following his mind. And had he been alive now, it would have been very different. So, once you understand this, so many other things fall into place. Once you understand the template I'm trying to explain to you, automatically you just view all of the world and all of these movements and opinions in a very mature manner, very different manner. It just makes sense. And I hope you think about it, read it, research it, and come back to me with your issues and concerns, no problem. So we talked about the two paradigms. I gave you some examples, and then I said there's a third paradigm. Now pause here before I move on. These three paradigms are nothing new. Every single few centuries, you find the same template, nothing new. It's just that this is the most recent iteration of 100 years ago. The templates are basically the same. From the first century, you had fuqaha and theologians who absorbed outer ideas, instantaneously Islamicized them. You had others that shut doors completely, and you had others that synthesized in an organic manner. Theology is my expertise. Go listen to my lectures about the development of Islamic theology, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Certain people like Ibn Sina and others, they absorbed Aristotle, hook, line and sinker. They became through and through Aristotelians, right? Ibn Rushd, Averroes, they literally absorbing. Ibn Sina and Al-Kindi is absorbing, Plato. He's literally becomes a Neoplatonist, Al-Kindi. So they are speaking in Arabic, using the term Allah, but what they're talking about is basically Aristotelian theology, which is not Islam. It's not Islam. And then you had others who just threw up a wall. We're not going to take anything from you guys, right? And the Athari school is one example. Nothing. We're going to have a complete blanket-proof wall. And then you had a middle group, the Mu'tazila and the Ash'ari and others, who kind of said, well, these are interesting ideas. Even though they're not coming straight from the Qur'an, but in our minds they would say, these are truths that transcend the Qur'an. And it's okay to, let's have an interplay. And so they came forth with a theology that was actually, ironically, is now the mainstream. Now those same movements are now in a new battle. They're actually reverting to another school, but that's besides the point here. Anyway, if you understand, you understand. So, I'm saying there's nothing new. The templates are the same. It's just, let's say the game is the same, the pieces move, right? The game is the same. What pieces are there, it just changes every few centuries. And we are seeing the same thing all over again. So I'm just tapping into the last iteration of 100 years ago. And the last iteration, I gave you iconic figures. You had Ali Abdul Raziq as one example, who basically was preaching almost a secular version of Islam. Islam has nothing to do with law. We just go to the mosque, we fast, and the law we can take from France and Europe. You had the exact opposite side, and I gave you some examples there. Muhammad Zahid al-Kawthari, you had Rashid Gangohi I mentioned, Mustafa Sabri, the last Sheikh of the Ottoman Empire, and you had other strands as well. In the Najdi school, you had a similar strand as well. Then you had the person we're going to talk about today very quickly, and that is somebody whom I admire immensely, so obviously this is my bias, and that is Rashid Rida, who actually died less than 100 years ago, 1935. 1935, Rashid Rida. And Rashid Rida was actually born in Syria, in Lebanon, in Syria, and he grew up a traditionalist Muslim, joined the Sufi tariqah, started studying the traditionalist Islam, but he came across the writings of a certain person by the name of Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani. And Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani is considered to be the father of new enlightenment in Islam. And Afghani and his student Muhammad Abdu, I mentioned very briefly last time, and Rashid Rida. These are the three names, memorize them. Afghani, his student Muhammad Abdu died 1905, Afghani died 1897, Abdu died 1905, Rashid Rida died 1935. These are student, teacher, okay? Teacher, student. Rashid Rida read Afghani as a child, as a young man, as a teenager. And he was mesmerized. Why? Because Afghani was one of the first people back in the 1880s, 1890s, talking about the dangers of colonization. Mentioning, Muslims, wake up. Unless you do something, this is before colonization reached its peak, and Afghani saw it before it came. So Afghani would travel the world. Afghani tried to create what is called the pan-Islamic movement, i.e. the Ummah. That's what they call pan-Islamism, right? I.e. he's going to Afghanistan, to Iran, to the Ottoman Turks, he's going to Arabia. He's saying, Muslims, unite and collectively take on the colonizers, or else you're never going to be able to do that. So his rhetoric was very atypical. He's not talking about, let's study a book of Aqidah. He's not saying, let's do this classical matan of fiqh. He's like, Muslims, we have civilizational, perils. You need to rethink through. Now, of course, Afghani also had, views that are atypical, so that's why he's viewed in a different light. But he started talking about the civilizational weaknesses of the ummah. And Rashid Rida was just mesmerized. He wrote a letter to him, said, I want to go become your student. By the time he traveled, Afghani had passed away. And so Rashid Rida never met Afghani. Rashid Rida then became a student of Afghani's main student, Muhammad Abdu. So Muhammad Abdu was in Egypt. And he was the great Grand Mufti. Remember, I told him he was the Grand Mufti. So Rashid Rida became his student. And the two of them started what became the most influential magazine in all of Islamic history, really. There's no magazine that can ever compete with it now because it was the first global magazine. There's no competition. You can't recreate that. Even the internet can't recreate it. There was nothing like it before. That magazine was called Majallat al-Manar. Majallat al-Manar. And Manar means the lighthouse. The lighthouse means the lighthouse. Now you understand, the secret is revealed. Majallat al-Manar is the lighthouse. And this magazine was published for around 40 years. And less than 40. And this majalla became, so remember, even the printing press was new. I have a whole lecture about the printing press in the ummah. Again, this is very contentious because now some people are trying to say, no, the ummah never rejected the printing press. Well, they clearly rejected it, that's without a doubt. And there's a revisionism going on, well, they rejected it for the reason. Bottom line, the Muslim world refused to print books for 350 years. You still had to handwrite books. While Newton is publishing, the principles of physics and optics, while the Western world is having an intellectual revolution, the Muslim world decided that printing presses were haram and should be banned. We should study with shuyukh and handwrite person to person, as it has always been done. Okay, the first person to introduce a printing press was Napoleon Bonaparte. When he invaded Egypt, he actually brought a printing press with him, and he is the one who began printing. And then after he left, some of the Christians of Egypt took it on, and then the Muslims took it on. So the first printing press is basically 1880, 1850, around this time frame in the Muslim world. Gutenberg was 1460 something. When is Gutenberg, right? So from 14 something until 18, nothing. And this is one of the issues I'm talking about. One of that mindset differences. Now again, the other group says, no, it wasn't the reason why they rejected it. Khair, you can rationalize it as much as you want. The printing press was not utilized by the ummah. And mass literacy and mass education, hence, was impeded. It's just a fact. So, bottom line, the first time now the printing press is being used to print a journal that is being sent around the globe. There was nothing like it. From Indonesia to Kazakhstan to Morocco, this magazine became the first global network of connection. Unprecedented. Nothing had ever happened like this before. And this is of the mind of Rashid Rida. This is what he's thinking, to connect the ummah together. And what is the magazine? Always is the same thing. Little bit of tafsir of the Qur'an in a modern manner. Go read any classical tafsir, guys. I'm sorry to be blunt here. You won't enjoy it. That's all I can say. It's going to go over your head. It's archaic. It's linguistical hermeneutics. It's an extraction of grammatical balagh. You're like, okay, but what does the verse mean for me? It's asbab al-nuzul, what Ibn Abbas, what so. Make it relevant for me. Rashid Rida does that. He writes a tafsir for his audience, 1910, in an Arabic they can read, in a style and a manner that is modern. Breaking barriers. You're not supposed to write tafsir like this. Tafsir is supposed to be quotations. Every seminary is teaching Tafsir al-Baydawi 1,000 years ago, Tafsir ibn Kathir 900 years ago. That's what seminaries do. Rashid Rida is like, well, I need to teach Quran to the people. And so let me give them a tafsir. So every Majallat al-Manar begins with a tafsir. And so eventually over 40 years, he has Tafsir al-Manar. Now it's in print, his tafsir. This broke so many barriers. After him, a floodgate of scholars began writing contemporary tafsirs, especially in Pakistan, India. It's just opened the floodgates. Like everybody's doing that now because he did that. Second section was hadith. And especially hadith that were deemed to be difficult or quote unquote problematic. How do we understand them, right? He wants to defend the Qur'an and the hadith. The third was fatawa. And this is where a whole new vista is opened up. He's talking about, number one, contemporary issues that nobody dares to discuss. And number two, answering them in ways that are livable, breathable. You can actually understand and like, oh, okay, I can. And again, there's so many examples. I mean, from the mundane of the first people to say it's permissible to use social media. There was no social media. What's the equivalent, 1905, 1910? Radio, newspaper is already doing that. And microphones. There was a massive debate going on about using microphone speakers in the masajid. And many scholars of Egypt and India said, any Qur'an that is recited, any that's batil, because that's not the actual voice. So you cannot pray behind somebody like that. And Rashid is like, well, this is not a new voice, it's amplifying. Photography was considered haram in some movements till when I was studying in that land. In the 90s, the senior clergy all said, and that was the fatwa I was taught, photography, videos, television, you cannot even have Islamic programs because it's imitating Allah's creation. And Rashid Rida, a century before, is like, you are not imitating, this is capturing the light. You are not drawing. Again, I mean, there's a gazillion fatwa, even dress. So South Africa had, Indian Muslims. Didat's grandfather is living in South Africa at the time. Literally, Ahmed Didat, his grandfather is living there. So the first Muslims living in the West, South Africa, they are writing to Rashid Rida. By the way, another point, the global fatwa. For the first time, you have people from Indonesia writing to Rashid Rida about nationalism. I'll mention this fatwa, it's actual fatwa. And Muslims of South Africa writing about wearing caps, hats. Because the fatwa their ulama had said is that you cannot wear hats. And in South Africa, in that time frame, if you didn't wear a hat, you're socially ostracized, you're not going to get a job. Every man wears a hat. It's considered crude. It's considered undignified back then for a man to not have a hat. So it's considered like you're a barbarian and uncool. You're not supposed to work in an office with your hair uncovered back then. You're not supposed to have it that. So the fatwa comes from the Muslims of South Africa. Can we wear this Western hat? It's not the clothing of our ancestors. And the fatwa from many of their scholars, this is imitating the kuffar. You know, the same standard stuff going on to this day. Rashid Rida goes, actually imitating the kuffar. You've heard this from me. I'm literally explaining Rashid Rida when I give my fatwas. It's an elaboration. Imitating the kuffar means you imitate them in that which is unique to them. Their rituals, their theology, not their language, not their cuisine, not their, if everybody's wearing a cap, Muslim and Kafir, Buddhist and Hindu, Christian and Jew, they're all wearing a cap. That's not imitating the kuffar. Rashid Rida says this in 1910. Muslims of Indonesia write to him. And they say there's this new concept called nationalism. This is an actual fatwa in Manar. We've never heard of it before. But under it, we are being told that Muslim and Buddhist and Hindu that are all locals and Christian should unite to expel the Dutch colonizers. Indonesia was colonized by the Dutch. So the Muslims of Indonesia say, listen, we were doing our jihad against the Dutch independently, but we're minority here. If we combine forces with people of other faiths, we have a chance, but they are saying we need to do so for freedom, independence, the nation state. Now again, we're going to come back to this issue. You already heard me say this. The concept of nation state is a very fragile one. It's a very imaginary one. It's a very recent one. This is just the reality. So the point is, Rashid Rida is the first alim to give the beginnings of a thorough response to nationalism. He's like, listen, it's a new concept. Doesn't mean it's bad. if it is utilized for good, it has good. But be careful that it doesn't become your primary identity. This is really prescient. It's really like, you can see this man is you say, I admire him immensely. You can see he's a thinker and intellectual. He's already realizing this identity could consume you, so be careful. Your primary identity is Islam. And if any other identity can utilize some good, then as long as you keep it within good, go ahead and join forces with all of these other people. And it's better to be independent from the Dutch and rule yourselves. Why not? But remember, you are Muslims and you have the responsibility of the Ummah. This fatwa was unprecedented. It's like, again, thinking through. And by the way, I have to say this. Almost all of the fatwa that were cutting edge from this paradigm, many of them were adopted by the traditionalists. You had to. Even though it took a while, but you had to. Okay? In India, the traditionalists, I don't want to mention their name, but you know who I'm talking about, they literally said it is haram to study science, engineering, mathematics, and English. You cannot study any of these sciences. Why? Because this is the kuffar's agenda. And somebody comes along who I agree with many aspects, and I don't have to agree with everything, but his vision eventually was adopted by the descendants of his very critics, and that's Sir Sayyid Ahmed Khan. Sir Sayyid Ahmed Khan said, no, it's not haram to study English. It's not haram to study the sciences. We need to be better than them. So let us form the Anglo-Muhammadan College, Aligarh, which is now called. Let us form a university in which we teach Muslims the Quran and Persian and Urdu and the sciences. First time ever. And the scholars who opposed him literally said, you're a kafir, because you are importing the ideas of the kuffar amongst us. And he stood his ground, and from the campus of Aligarh, Pakistan was formed. By the way, the third group always impacts civilizationally, and then the traditionalists follow along. I have to say this bluntly. It is always the third group that leads the way in actual, tangible good, and then others just follow along because they're not involved in that realm. My point is that Rashid Rida then starts becoming basically a voice of reformist thought. And you see this in everything, not just in Majal al-Manar. He actually wrote many books. So for example, he wrote a book called The Muhammadan Revelation, or Al-Wahy al-Muhammadi. And this book was unique in that he'd attempted for the very first time to defend Islam in a logical and rational manner against the critiques of the Orientalists. He doesn't go about it the standard way that most scholars would have done, which is, back in the day, it would have been quoting the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ. Now the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ are a great lecture for Muslims. But if you're not a Muslim, you understand there's a circularity, right? It's not going to, so to logically try to prove that the Prophet ﷺ is a prophet, this is not the language and the discourse of most traditionalists. To try to take it on and speak to a mind that is not coming from, the standard tradition. Islamic feminism began in the turn of the century, 1900s, early 1900s. And you had Muslim reformists calling for radical, just the same paradigm, radical reevaluation of Islamic gender and norms. Literally calling for the abolishment of the hijab, right? Literally. Well, these weren't Muslim reformists in the name of Islam, these were Muslim reformers. They were Muslims in identity, they weren't quoting the Qur'an and Sunnah. They were simply saying, we don't have to do any of this. Ataturk and others of that nature. You had others obviously counter-reacting. This is really awkward to state, but this is facts, these are history. Most traditionalist scholars were opposed to the idea of women's schools. This isn't just in Afghanistan. This is in Egypt. This is in India. This is in Arabia. It's across the Muslim world. It's nothing new. Now, for the record, to be accurate, they were not opposed to female education. Well, frankly, some of them were, and there are fatwa, I kid you not, that fatwa that literally state it is better for women to not be learning to read and write. There are fatwa in the 19th century. But they're not a fringe, but they're a minority. They're a minority. The majority argued that if you want to educate a woman, do it in the house. We cannot have women's schools. Why? If you have women's schools, then the culture of women remaining at home and not leaving unless they have to will be destroyed. And so we're going to have all the young ladies go out when the culture, by and large, had norms that young ladies did not go out by and large, especially middle and upper class. Yes, the peasants in all of history, they have just different, that's the reality. They have to go and work in the fields. But if you were urban, even lower middle class, if you were living in a city, then there were norms. And if a young lady left, it was accompanied by somebody. There was always protection. There was double, triple veiling, i.e. not only was she typically veiled, she's in some type of other veiling or whatnot. I mean, that's to go ask your grandmothers if they're still alive. Go ask your grandmothers, especially in India. Go ask them. And I'm sure in Egypt, this would be your great-grandmother, so that time is gone. Egypt changed before India did. But pictures are clear. The amount of veils that took place. Now, when you have girls schooling, that's not going to happen. So traditionalist scholars, by and large, many of them, this was the norm. That they're like, no need for this. Women should stay at home. If you want to educate them at home. Rashid Rida writes a book, and it's called, look at the title of the book, A Call to the Fair Sex. You know, the uplifted sex, the gender that is, you know, the more noble and the more, you know, appropriate, like, you know, it's a call to the fair sex. And in it, he argues that, of course, women should be educated. The world is changing, times are changing, we want our women to be educated. But he's not a modernist, he's not a reformist. He clearly says that, firstly, gender segregation, especially when they're older. Secondly, that the curriculum should be munasib for them. And without a doubt, by the way, even in this country, my dear sisters and brothers, go look at the curriculum up until the 60s. Women's curriculum, they had something called home economics, you know. That's a different thing. Like I know you guys find this hard to believe, even in this country. You know, I studied at the Ivy League called Yale, right? The first female to be admitted to Yale, the first female, 1972. 72. I was born 3 years after that. That's when the first female entered, and even that protest took place. Professors, teachers did not want women. This is 72. So you're living in a world that has radically changed, right? The question is, does the Sharia prohibit women from having a school? Or is it something that the culture dictates? Do you see the question here, right? I'm not criticizing the past. Maybe some of you are going to get angry, you think I should. I'm not criticizing the past. It's their norms. I did live amongst them. But must I conform to how my great-grandmother lived? That is the question. And Rashid Rida argued, it is completely permissible. We need to do this to expand and to grow as a civilization and a force. But yes, segregation, and you know, he lists all the conditions here. The curriculum should be suited to them, and you know, we need to teach them, you know, how to be good Muslimas and whatever, the standard stuff, right? But again, for the time, it is revolutionary, forward thinking, and on and on. I can go on and on in this regard. Point is, and with this inshallah we will summarize and open the floor for Q&A. The point is the following. Rashid Rida represents, he's not the only person, you understand, obviously. Each one of these strands has many people. Each one of these paradigms has many, but each one also has an iconic big name, right? And for this third strand, without a doubt, the big name 100 years ago is Rashid Rida, okay? Rashid Rida was somebody who came from traditionalist Islam, was raised in traditionalist Islam, but then began to argue that outdated notions of theology and law were harmful for the ummah. He became a critic, a very vocal critic of Al-Azhar. That's why Al-Azhar did not like him, because he considered Al-Azhar to be outdated, ossified. You guys are teaching things that are not useful. You need to revamp. And he began calling for tajdeed, revivalism. And he said this was how Islam originally was. And he coined a term, and that term was Salafiyya. In his mind, Salafiyya was not the movement that we associate with it now. In his mind, Salafiyya was before there were established theologies, before there were established schools of law, before there were all of these ossified, structures. How was the ummah? It was far more open-minded, far more vibrant. It was understanding of the mixing between the Qur'an and between culture. That's what we need. We need to go back to the original. And so he coined the term Salafiyya. This is the Salafiyya of Rashid Rida. And he latched on to Ibn Taymiyyah, because Ibn Taymiyyah for him represented a part of that strand, a revivalist strand, breaking away from the ossification, rethinking through issues. And so he became an admirer of Ibn Taymiyyah. And he began arguing for an Islam that was, listen to this, number one, socially relevant. Most classical scholars of the time had little to no comments about social issues. They are teaching their books and their whatnot. Colonizations happening. At the time, there was another threat as well, and that is missionaries. This is a whole different topic that you guys should study. America and Europe were spending tens of millions of dollars, thinking very naively at the time that all we have to do is finance missionaries to go into the Muslim world and they'll all become Christians in a generation. And so missionary activities began in India and in Egypt and in Sudan. They would form beautiful hospitals, beautiful schools. Go talk to your parents and grandparents. The best schools of India and Egypt are St. Andrew's School and St. this school and St. John Hopkins School. But why? Because the missionaries formed them. And the goal was to subtly, convert people. There was a massive threat going on. Rashid Rida had an argument with the scholars of Al-Azhar. What are you guys doing to counteract the missionaries? You're not doing anything. You're just lost in social activism, relevancy, right? And then political engagement. Rashid Rida saw the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. He has an entire series of articles about the Khilafah, where he chronicles, like from the beginning to the end, he chronicles his views. And he felt this emptiness, this loss. We need to do something. We can't just sit here and watch this happen. Whereas by and large, traditionalist scholars had nothing really to say about the collapse of the empire. Meaning, they're not actively engaged in a revival of politics. And by the way, you see the impacts of these strands to this day. So Rashid Rida's strand, socially active, politically engaged. By and large, traditionalist strands, at best, no comments about what's going on in the world, no comments about social realities, and at worst, subservient, acquiescent pawns. A'udhu billah. I don't want to be too explicit, but we see this reality. We see this reality. That politics and social activity, this is not, let politics be politics. We have our tradition. In fact, some of them, let's be generic here, some of them even said the way of our ancestors is to suffer when suffering happens. Let the Palestinians suffer, this is the way. Stoicism and whatnot, he quotes Fulan and Fulan. It's just like, it's a different world from the world I would like to inhabit, And against the uprisings, against the political activism, quietism, whatnot, obedience to the rulers completely as a part of Islam. This is very frustrating for me because I strongly disagree. And I'm not doubting the sincerity of all of them. Wallahi, I know many of them are sincere in that they think this is right. But I just can't understand how you can read the seerah and not see that Islam is also social activism. Islam is also political engagement. How can you not see this? So the Deobandis, love and respect to them, classic example. They did a great work, may Allah bless them. Wallahi, they did a great work, but for their time and place. When the British ruled India, they understood they can't fight the British. I get it. They adopted pacifism. I get it. But my polite question, is that consistently and constantly a part of Islam, or was that a judicious methodology that was adopted for a time and place? Or should that be till all of eternity? Do you see my question here? Okay, 1857, I get it. You understood the British are in charge. You understood they've massacred 1 million people. You can't fight them. Khalas, acquiesce. I get it. But it's now 2026. We are American citizens. We have rights here. We're supposed to be able to carve out. Does Islam ask us to fight for our rights legitimately or not? Or must we constantly remain, aloof from politics? This is the question that we need to ask, right? So this is where, again, the third paradigm, social relevance, political activism, and a rethinking about what it means to be a Muslim. What is Islamic theology? Is it a classical textbook written 1,000 years ago by a human being? Or is it what the Qur'an teaches? What is Islamic fiqh? Is it the developed madhabs that, yes, we respect, but cannot make any change? Or does the Sharia allow us to rethink through over a myriad of issues, right? This last week, the internet was abuzz with the fatwa I was responsible for, or a part of, and that is zakat for lobbying. Zakat for lobbying. It's not just coming from me. But again, there's so much precedence in this regard. So much precedence. And Islamophobia is reaching crazy levels in this country. In our own state, 3 congressmen in the last week have joined a new caucus called Anti-Sharia Caucus. And today in Congress, our masjid was mentioned by name. They're wanting to ban Sharia, shut down our masajid. And these electoral races, the local ones, they involve small amounts of votes and money. If every Muslim in Texas was told, a little bit of zakah, $5-10, that's all the fatwa says, 1/8, little bit of chicken, just give a small amount for the sake of Allah, to make sure that the people that are against their own constitution, because this is unconstitutional. Imagine how many Muslims are in Dallas. Guess, I don't know, 150, no, more than that, sorry, 200,000-300,000, something like that. Just imagine if all of them gave $5, just 5. That's a game changer for each district. Do you understand? Right? That's all. But look, with I know, wallahi, they're sincere. The emotionalism, the attacks, the viciousness, the words that are being used. Go ahead and make fun of the children of Gaza being starved. A'udhu billah. A'udhu billah. If I wanted to, I could play your game as well. You're willing for them to be bombed, only to be fed with zakat money after they're bombed. And I'm wanting to stop the bombing. If I wanted to be emotional, I could also be emotional. But may Allah protect me from stooping to that level. This is the point here. This is what our scholars said, and they quote, Fulan, 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 this door is closed. You're not supposed to give that. Okay, you live in your world, I'm living in mine. Islam wants us to protect the ummah. And if zakat money is needed to prevent a massacre and genocide, so be it. It should be used to prevent a massacre and genocide. It's that simple. It's not really, and if you disagree with politeness. But again, the level of viciousness because the problem comes when you begin rethinking through their version of Islam. In their minds, you're rethinking through Islam. Do you understand? This is the key fundamental difference. And I've said this to you before. One of the main reasons why the critics are so vicious, and it wasn't you, Rashid Rida was the same way, guys. Nothing, Ibn Taymiyyah, the ironies, his critics were the same. One of the main reasons is because in their worldview, when you tinker with their reality, it's not just their reality. They equate their reality with the religion of Allah. And so for them, it really becomes an existential threat. And so people like Rashid Rida, or the people who follow Rashid Rida, like yours truly, really become the great enemy from within. Because, I would say, we can effectively demonstrate that their tradition is human. And when we do so, that's very terrifying. I'm not the first to do this. Many people before me have done it. So to finish off here, Rashid Rida really had an amazing impact in the ummah. By the way, before I mention the impact, very quickly, the criticisms against him by the traditionalists are almost all ad hominem. What is ad hominem? You attack the person, not what he's saying. You go listen to any criticism of Rashid Rida by that school. Oh, he was a secret Freemason. He was the part of a cult. He was this. Ya akhi, let's critique what he said. Don't bring me these, oh, he was just a reformist. These are adjectives. I can call you an ultra-fanatic traditionalist. Doesn't mean anything. These are adjectives. Explain, clarify. So you will understand once you start hearing most of the criticism against him is ad hominem. It's just like adjectives that have little weight to them. Rashid Rida, because he was that dynamic intellectual, he really inspired an entire diverse group of people. So diverse that those that followed him don't actually see eye to eye amongst each other anymore. And I'll give you two examples. The first of them, none other than Al-Albani, the founder of modern Salafism. Al-Albani, the Albanian scholar who lived in Syria, Al-Albani, as a young teenager, read Rashid Rida's Manar back in the 20s. And he fell in love with the idea. The idea of tajdeed, of revival. The idea of rethinking through fiqh. The idea of not being classified as an ossified traditionalist. And he took the term Salafiyya and he ran with it in a direction totally different than Rashid Rida. Okay, Al-Albani was inspired by Rida, took some of the aspects of Rida, and then went an entirely different trajectory. The main student of Rashid Rida, who actually lived with him, interacted with him, and became the editor of Al-Manar after Rashid Rida died, was none other than Hassan al-Banna. And Hassan al-Banna went on to found the largest political religious organization in the history of mankind, and that is the Muslim Brotherhood. Hassan al-Banna was Rashid Rida's main student. And the ideology of bringing Islam to social activism, bringing Islam to grassroots, bringing Islam to solve contemporary problems, and leaving advanced technical fiqh and aqidah to the scholars. Don't mess up the masses with this. That's basically coming from Rashid Rida. The thought of Rashid Rida is encapsulated in Hassan al-Banna, who then takes it to a different level. And again, I'm speaking as somebody who's an outsider to the movement. I'm not criticizing, I'm not praising, I'm being factual here. The Brotherhood went through multiple iterations, and in particular, when another person came by the name of Sayyid Qutb in the 60s, Sayyid Qutb radically revolutionized the ideology of the Brotherhood, and it went to different trajectory. And then after him it went to different, then after him it split into multiple groups. You have the Palestinian branch, very eager branch, which we're not going to mention by name, lots of jazba and josh with the Palestinian branch. You have the Egyptian branch, which still remains. Of course, when the people came to America, they founded a number of branches here. Even ISNA was founded, the emissary was founded by some of the people that came with that ideology. Why? Because that ideology was, how can we make Islam relevant to the people? What can we do in America? Let's form a group of people. Let's form Jumu'ah. Let's form Masajid. Let's form an institute. Let's form an MSA. That's what they did. The founders came from that movement, then obviously they moved on, right? ISNA and MSA, unlike what the far right says, have nothing to do with the Brotherhood anymore. They have nothing to do with the Brotherhood anymore. But the founders of them came from that because the ideology was, Islam isn't just theory. Islam is reality and practice. So now that we're in America, what can we do? Well, let's come together annually. Let's have an annual convention. Let's talk about how we can bring scholars. Some type of activism that is grassroots. Whereas when the traditionalists came, with love and respect to them, let's form a madrasa and bring kids and make tahfidh al-Quran. Which is great. We needed that as well. But which one had a civilizational impact? We need both. We need this, we need that. So these are two simple strands that came from Rashid Rida. Look at how diametrically opposed they are. By the way, other strands came as well from him, intellectual thinkers that went on to start rethinking through, if you know your history in America, there was a group called IIIT here in America. Their founders also were kind of students of that thought. This is multiple. In California, we had great icons that came in the 60s and 70s, the Hadhud brothers. Also, they're coming from this, strand here as well, like rethinking through and wanting to bring something of practical relevance to the ummah. And again, not everybody is the exact same, but they are tapping into this understanding of Islam being socially relevant, politically engaged, spiritually uplifting immediately, and that the more advanced issues of theology and law, whether we rethink through them or whether we save them only for the scholarly class, but they don't need to be made the upfront and center of our discourse. And we can discuss Islam in a different manner, a manner of relevancy, topics that people are interested in, social justice in Islam. You're not going to find that topic in classical books of fiqh, right? Gender equity, at least in Islam. You're not going to find that topic in classical books of fiqh. Animal rights in Islam. I guarantee you, you will not find a single treatise pre-modernity about animal rights. But come the last 50 years, 70, 80 books have been written. Animal rights in Islam. Is it haram to talk about animal rights in Islam? Nobody's going to say it is. Nobody's going to say it is. But here's a question for you. Where did this discourse come from? The term animal rights, the concept of animal rights, they didn't exist in our Sharia the way that they exist in the Western world. So we took an idea that's emanating from the West, and we found the Qur'an and Sunnah pertinent to it, and we created a new discourse called Islamic animal rights. Is that a problem? Yes or no? Then why is it a problem to have talks about Islamic democracy? Why is it a problem to have talks about political engagement in America? Why is it a problem to have modern talks? If you can understand, even the most traditional minded would not have a problem with these types of topics. Okay, great, animal rights is great, but more relevant to me, what do I do about Gaza as an American? That's a topic I need. I'm not going to find it in pre-modern classical textbooks. I need to create that discourse. I need to be, and I might make mistakes. You know what? I'm human. But somebody has to start the process. Somebody has to be brave enough to break away from what is found in 500-year-old textbooks and talk about something that is relevant for the ummah. And if I make mistakes, may Allah forgive me, correct those mistakes and build something better. Rather than criticize, say, oh, this guy's reformist, this guy's liberal. No, simply trying to make Islam relevant is not reformist. That is what Islam is supposed to be. And in my understanding, that's what people like Rashid Rida, and frankly, yes, Ibn Taymiyyah, for me, Ibn Taymiyyah is of the same strand. I read him very differently than his followers do. And I used to be of those followers types. I read him very differently now. For his time, for his place, he did what Rashid Rida was doing for his time and place. And I hope Allah blesses me. I'm not to that level, I'm not comparing it. But I hope somewhere down there, I'm also following in their footsteps. And that is trying to make the religion relevant and dynamic and useful for the people that are living in our time and place. And in doing so, if I make mistakes, which is inevitable, I'm going in a territory nobody has gone, I ask Allah's forgiveness, and I ask the next generation to build from the good and to overlook the bad. That's the only way forward. We must be relevant to the times. That's the only way that Islam is going to flourish. And as for the traditionalist strands, they're not bad. Astaghfirullah, they're not evil, but they're not going to allow an organic flourishing of the deen. They might preserve some aspects, but they're going to fail in other aspects. And the biggest example for this was Gaza 2 years ago. I've said this multiple times there and all across the country. All strands of Islam have demonstrated we have failed. We couldn't even help in the smallest of manners. We have failed. This really requires us to retrospect, contemplate, look in the mirror. Traditionalism might have a lot of good, but it also is not perfect because it's human. And our strands as well that I'm a part, even though I would say we did more than, but still, yes, we have a lot to learn. So bottom line, understand the diversity of thought is nothing new, and then you need to make a decision, and nobody can make it on your behalf. Overall, which of these strands do you find to be the most rigorous and the most praiseworthy and the most useful and most importantly, the most authentic to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants? Nobody can decide that other than you. You need to decide, and I am telling you to go ask other people from other ideologies. They're not bad, they're not evil. You know my philosophy. They're all good, but some might be more useful than others. That's my ideology. In the end of the day, it is up to you. And with this, inshallah, we come to the conclusion for today's lecture. Are you saying that in the modern day, we have sufficient grounds to consider the institution of milk yamin haram? Did I say haram? No. I never used the word haram. But I did say that it's not legitimate in our times because there's no mechanism to obtain it. And we have the right to say this institution does not need to be brought back. We have the right to, so the technical term, taqyeed al-mubah. Make the mubah restricted. This is permitted in the Sharia. The mubah restricted. And in that, so you're talking about milk yamin. I push back at the traditionalists. Where is jizya in the modern world? Where is jizya practiced in the modern world? Not even Afghanistan. And yet it is explicit in the Qur'an. You can't do it in the modern world. Not because the Sharia is outdated. It's because Allah allowed a tool. When the tool is there, it can be used, use it. When it cannot be used, don't use it. It's that simple. Nobody's saying jizya is outdated. Nobody's saying jizya is haram. It's just not applicable in the modern world. The modern world has changed. So what is wrong then with also embracing milk yamin is not applicable and other things are not applicable? Nobody's negating, nobody's saying it's abrogated, nobody's using the word haram. We're simply saying for the time we're living in, and this is the beauty of Islam, by the way. Milk yamin is not obligatory, jizya is not obligatory. It was allowed. It doesn't have, it's not wajib, right? Salah is wajib. Siyam is wajib. Jizya is not wajib. So if a time place comes where there's no jizya, the religion is still complete. You see what I'm saying? You guys following me? This is what I'm saying as well. Now, I'm not talking about future, apocalyptic times happen, the world changes. We'll deal with fiqh when that happens. Right here and now, we don't need to call for jizya in Timbuktu, in Malaysia, in Arabia, in Oman. We don't need to. In Pakistan, we don't need to call for jizya. No scholar is calling for jizya. And for some reason, nobody criticizes that. Yet when I come along and start rethinking through other things, again, you just have to be fair and consistent in this regard. If the truth is divine but tradition is human, how do we draw the line between the two? Excellent question. Excellent question. The response, I can't answer it in 5 minutes. This is where scholarship is required, and this is where you need to decide who you consider a scholar, because this is technical stuff. This is where fiqh, usul al-fiqh, extrapolation of how you derive rulings, this is where the whole game takes place. And in the end of the day, I hate to say this, but there has to be somebody whom you consider an authority and you follow the authority. There's no way around this, right? This is like asking, which doctor should I follow between 2 or 3 prescriptions? I can't tell you. You're going to have to make a judgment call, right? You have to just decide which doctor do you think really is the best, for the, you just have to make a judgment call. And pray istikhara, ask Allah and follow your instinct. I explained to you the paradigms, and for me, I make a distinction between what is known by necessity of the religion, the unanimous consensus of the ummah, normative Islam, and this is, alhamdulillah, the bulk of the ummah has agreed to this. We pray 5 times a day, we fast Ramadan, we avoid the major sins, murder is haram, riba as a concept is haram. Now, what constitutes riba? You're going to have 3 opinions. Nobody says riba is halal. But then, what constitutes riba? By the way, Rashid Rida was one of the first to say the mortgages are not riba. And I forgot to mention, Qardawi is one of his main proteges. Sheikh Qardawi, whom I admire immensely, is basically coming from that school of thought. Qardawi is not a madhabist. And of course, the madhabists don't like Qardawi. It's a standard thing. If you think Qardawi is not a scholar, I get that, then follow those whom you think are scholars. But the strand I am coming from is the strand that Rashid Rida Qardawi, they're the ones that came from, in which scholarship is not defined by quoting one madhab. Scholarship is not defined by mastering one particular tradition. It depends on what your ruler is when you measure something, right? If you're going to measure a scholar by how much he's memorized of that one tradition, I guarantee you, yes, many of the people outside of that would not constitute scholars according to their laws. But it's up to you to decide. And in the end of the day, my main point to you is to understand, this is not fringe movements. These are mainstream movements. Whether you like it or not, Qardawi's movement, the Brotherhood, these are massive movements that are tapping into Rashid Rida. These aren't trivial. And it demonstrates that there's a level of orthodoxy there as well. And the Madhabist tradition is also a level of orthodoxy. Wallahu alam. How did Salafiyya change from Rashid Rida's ideology to what it is known as today? Very simple. Rashid Rida's ideology attempted to use Salafism for a while. Hassan al-Banna used the term. Hassan al-Banna said, we are Salafi in ideology. But he wrote this before Al-Albani started. So when Al-Albani and his movement took the term, Rashid Rida's movement just abandoned the term. So the term simply fell into disuse by the followers of Rashid Rida. And it was then taken up by the followers of Al-Albani. And so then the Salafism as we know it today has almost nothing to do with Rashid Rida. If Rashid Rida inspired the founder of the Brotherhood, who was the Indian counterpart who inspired Maududi, Maududi is coming from a similar mindset and wavelength. And remember, like I tried to explain to you, these templates are not new. These templates go back in time. So Maududi and Hassan al-Banna are very similar in their ideology. In fact, it is very likely that one of them was reading the books of the other, because they're contemporaneous but in different time frames. It is very likely that there's an actual intermixing of ideas, and we know this because same terms are used and they're two different lands away. Hakimiyya, they're using similar terms. So clearly they're aware of each other's existence and they're reading each other's writings here. And Maududi is also influenced by others like Iqbal. Now Iqbal, by the way, is another mind altogether. And Iqbal would be also in the third category. If you had to put him in one of the three, even though you could make a fourth category for him. But Iqbal, he has a book, The Reconstruction of Religious Thought. The title of the book is telling you, I'm paradigm 3. The reconstruction. I don't want what you guys are teaching. I want the reconstruction of the tajdeed, the same term. So Maududi's tapping into that type as well, okay? And Iqbal is his own mind. Iqbal is also one of the unique philosophers. So again, I would consider, and by the way, the Pakistanis in the audience, you can love the traditionalists as much as you want. It was Iqbal who founded Pakistan, the idea of Pakistan, right? The traditionalists don't offer much in terms of social and political activism. It's this group that actually leads the way. Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan and Iqbal and others did this. Do you think that women should ask permission from their husbands to do etc.? Listen, brothers and sisters, gender roles must be negotiated organically with love and compassion in every marriage. Please, those of you that are not married, take my advice as your older, you guys don't want me as a brother, so Uncle Ji, khalas, okay, as your older uncle, please take my advice. Do not approach marriage, when you're not married, do not approach marriage with a stringent, non-negotiable understanding. It doesn't work that way. Both genders, both of you, understand you're going to have to work together if you want the marriage to flourish. So there must be compromise on both sides. And gender roles, the Sharia has not dictated the bulk of the specifics of gender roles. Some things are there, but the rest is left for the couples. So these types of minute details, before marriage, have generic conversations. Don't have a long list of 25 questionnaire. Do you think this is, do you think? That's not going to work that way, right? Just have generic, see if there's overall a template. Then Bismillah, after praying istikhara, you think it is the right choice, Bismillah, tawakkal ala Allah, and work together. You'll have a few fights, you'll have a few back and forths. Work together, that's the only way forward. Otherwise, if you approach with this intransigence, listen, a marriage will not function if you open up a legal textbook and demand from your spouse to follow that textbook. That's not how a marriage functions. You're talking to a live human being with emotions, with feeling. You cannot open a legal textbook to solve your marital problems. You're going to have to open your heart and listen to your spouse's heart, and then find a way forward. And there are these gray areas where you're going to have to, negotiate. Yes, traveling of women, the Sharia says one thing. If you ask me, that law came down when traveling of women was very difficult, and when it is safe, then it is allowed for them to travel. But that's my opinion. What if the husband doesn't follow that opinion? The wife is going to have to figure out how to work around that, see what they can do, see if they can change their mind. So all of this goes back and forth in this regard. Would you argue that traditionalists have a very rigid understanding of